Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Richest Men in Town podcast. I'm Mike Freeman, and along with my good friend and co-host Tyler Gould, we're excited to welcome you to our little podcast project. Tyler and I are just a couple of middle-aged husbands and dads driven to live our best lives. We want to be better every day, so here we'll be sitting down with great people. Not famous people, but great people that we admire, to learn their secret to living the rich life. Probably not the rich life you're thinking of. Our guests come in humbled and surprised at the invitation and hopefully leave feeling proud and grateful, realizing just how good they really have it. So pull up a chair, stay a while, and raise a glass with us as we toast our guests to the richest men in town. That guy that I was telling you about, so out of nowhere, brain tumor, and he's all of a sudden got some change in plans, and he's on the edge of his seat waiting for a phone call to indicate what kind of tumor.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what that feels like. And he says, I reach out to him and he says, hey man, that means a lot coming from you. A lot of respect for you and your family. I'm loving being home with my family, and rehabbing is a hobby of mine anyway. So I'm down for a challenge.
Yeah.
Hope you're doing good. And yeah. I've been thinking about him ever since I heard the news, and I'm like, man, I hope if something were to be handed to me like that in this life, that I would be like, I'm down for the challenge, versus fetal position, sucking my thumb, crying for my mommy, right? Like that's grown up mortality staring you in the face.
Yeah.
And this brother is like, I got you. I love that.
No,
I just don't know if I just don't know. You don't know till you know, right? But like, man, that's exemplary to me.
I think too, there's this, I think when you surround yourself with the right people, you know what I mean? There's a lot of strength that comes in this, in the people that are around you. I would imagine that this person, I don't know who he is, and but I would imagine that he's got a pretty strong wife. He's got some people around him. Yeah
The irony is the wife's message is, I'm scared.
Well, I'm sure she's not pounding that drum to him.
All right. And I don't
mean?
know if maybe he's scared and saying the right, saying the thing. Because part of it is saying the thing, right?
It is.
Part of it is like, hey, I'm scared, but like, I'm gonna use my approach to this, and I'm gonna be positive on the messaging, or right, my world will fall apart.
100%. And I think that how we frame things, both, how we frame things verbally, right, is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It impacts those people around us. But I also think how we frame things in our own mind, is important too, right? Like there's been, we've all gone through moments where we've thought, no, I can't do this. But then you tell yourself, like, do I have a choice to do this? Like right now, I don't have a choice. Like my choice is to get up, dust myself off and work. I mean, obviously it's a different situation for him, but look, I honestly think,
but even how, right? It's not even like the what.
No, it's
the how, like to the end, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, and I think too, like, honestly, and I mentioned this to you earlier, but with my family, we were talking about just the state of life, right, in general. And I told him, I said, this is our mantra for the next 12 months. It's 2 Timothy, the first chapter, 7th verse, for God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And that's what I want to hang my hat on. And then I also think always about, I always have that thing in my head from John Wooden, that things work out best, right? What's the quote? Things work out best for those who make the best of how things work out, And I think a lot of it's mental, man. And for someone to be in your friend's situation and be able to say, hey, I'm good at this. I'm sure that he is good at that. But I think at certain times he has to remind himself that I'm good at that, you know?
Yeah. And it just got me thinking, like we ask from time to time on the show, what are you afraid of? Right. What's
Yeah.
your biggest fear? But like actually going into the archives and pulling up that file called Afraid. And when's the last time you were afraid and applied that Timothy verse, right? Because the natural man is afraid.
Yeah.
And the idea is perfect love casteth out that fear, right?
Right.
That fear doesn't come from God. God doesn't speak in that language. But like you've got to take it and you've got to apply it to your heart and to your mind when you're in those moments, or you'll be shrinking, man. You'll be shrinking. Like Costanza.
I agree.
Like Costanza in the cold water.
No, I totally agree with you. But I do think, and I mean, 100%, I think that, it's interesting. I think that if we sat back, I've had this thought before, Mike, when I'm, I'll be driving around and I see someone on the side of the road that's got a sign, right, that says, "Hey, I need a few bucks. I'm down and out." And I've had the thought before, like, how close am I to that? You know what I mean? Like, how many wrong turns is it going to take for me to be sitting on the corner with a sign that says, "Hey man, I need some help," And I think that if we sat and we looked at that, it's scary. It's scary. It's a scary thought. And there's a lot of things that, to be totally honest with you, that I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of a lot of things. And a lot of it has to do with, letting my family down or hurting my family in whatever way, or, prematurely leaving my family. Right.
Can you go to, we're going to have Tony Giovaniello is going to be joining us. Can't wait. Yeah. I'm excited. I met Tony through Rajiv, through Steven, through Carol, through some of that work. Tony is an amazing guy. Can't wait to get his story. But if Tony were to just jump in here and I were to just point blank ask him, when's the last time you were afraid? Right? Like doing that work and looking at what you've overcome, I think that's a valuable exercise every once in a while, because it helps you prepare for those fears. Because that list of things that you just kind of rattled off, I have hypothetical fears.
Yeah.
It's like, when was the last time I was afraid? Right. And in the end, whether that story was a happy ending or a sad ending, you got through it, and you got through it because of that love of God. Right.
Yeah. And I think that, there's, and you make a good point. We talk about this a lot together. That idea of remembering is huge. I mean, the value of remembering our ability to overcome fears is huge, but also remembering the lessons learned from when we did shrink. Because I'll be honest with you, I have moved in the wrong direction at times because I was afraid, and I can recall some of those things, and that to me is as important as the times where I was able to overcome some of those fears.
Oh man, so much to share, so much to talk about, so much to think about. I mean, I think of that love, but I also think of, and maybe it's the same freaking word, right? But like trust.
Yeah.
Who are we trusting? Am I putting my trust in the arm of flesh? Or am I going to trust in that God who made me, in his son, Jesus Christ, right? And if I put my trust there, what is there to be afraid of?
I mean, look, yeah, if we step back and we have this like really enhanced eternal perspective, then I think, yeah, we can look at all things and go, gosh, blip on the screen, right? I used to tell people
blip on the screen.
I used to tell people like, when someone would come to me and say, man, life is too hard and I don't think I can take it. I would say, before this life, when we were sitting up before this life and they said, hey, guess what? I'm going to send you down there and you're going to go through some stuff for 80, 90 years. Like sitting there looking at eternity, we're like, oh yeah, sign me up. 80, 90 years done like that. I can do that tomorrow in my sleep. No worries. Then you get here and the reality of what 80, 90 years looks like through our eyes. We're like, oh my gosh, this is brutal. But, I think that there's perspective is a big deal, right?
But props again, kind of going to that's who you surround yourself with, right? I mean, we need to surround ourselves with people that are going to shift that perspective to the eternal.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like to have that, hey, blip on the screen, man. I don't have a tattoo, man. I think a blip on the screen tattoo right on my wrist or something, just to remind me, like
little
blip on the screen, man.
Yeah.
It's just a blip on the screen.
No, I'm excited to learn from Tony tonight and to hear about his life. And, he's got a couple years on us, a little bit. And I love that. Because there's some roads traveled that we haven't traveled, and so there's a lot of
what he's gonna bring Dan Boone style energy. Are you ready for this? I'm gonna click the button.
Let's do it. Let's open the door, man.
Tony Giovaniello, welcome in town. How are you, brother?
I'm doing fabulous, Mike. How are you today?
You know what? Here's the thing, Tony. Here's the thing. I've been doing this for a little bit, right? This podcast thing. And I can't remember the last time I was so excited for Tyler to meet one of my friends than I am right now, brother. I cannot wait to get into this. Welcome. I'm excited. Tyler, Tony, Tyler, let's do this.
I love it. It's good to see you, Tony. It's good to meet you, my friend.
Yeah. It's nice to have it was one little button. I just had to figure out. And it even had a little light on it.
How we living, Tony? How we doing? How are things? How's the family?
Well, the family is great. I'm spending so much time with my grandkids who are at the ripe ages of 5 and 3. So, they're just excited and they're full of energy and they're just loving life and they're so innocent and pure. And that's just a beautiful thing. And boy, if we could all just keep that for 60 or 70 or 80 years,
well, actually,
it'd be a beautiful world.
Let's get into that innocent and pure, right? Because we were just talking about all kinds of things, Tony, but thinking about moments that we've been afraid and thinking about that human nature tendency of shrinking in those moments, and then how can we learn from those moments? And then moving forward, how do we overcome fear? So, Tony, I'm going to throw that question out to you. I'm sure you've had some moments in life that have dealt you a little bit of fear. I'm sure that right now, as you sit where you are in life, there are things that you're afraid of. How does Tony overcome fear?
Well, it's interesting because it's a continuum over time. It was a lot different when I was younger than it is today, because when I was younger, I faced everything on my own, right? I had to figure out things or not and suffer the consequences. Yeah. And I'm not a guy that likes to fail. And, fear is a powerful emotion. But fear, as I got older, I learned that fear is an earthly emotion. It's a fleshly emotion, right? And as I started to realize that there's more for me to lean on, fear became less of an issue. I'm not saying it's disappeared because, I'm not totally there yet, but I think it's easier to manage for me now.
Tony, that is like lining up bowling pins for us to knock down, right? I mean, so many of those things. We actually went to that 2 Timothy verse, right? Where God hath not given us the spirit of fear. And like, I love that. Hey, that's a worldly thing. That's an earthly thing. let's not necessarily preoccupy ourselves with fleshly things, right? Things of this mortality.
But it's so easy to just fall back on, on what you can touch and feel and what you see in front of you, when in reality, we see very little of what's in front of us.
Yeah. I love that. I'm just, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, that we live in a world where, it's a lot of times people can feel like they're on a hamster wheel, and they're chasing something that maybe isn't coming into focus too clear. But if they step off that hamster wheel, it's a tumble, right? So I think that, as Mike and I were talking, I mentioned to Mike, I said, sometimes there's value in recognizing the things that you maybe shrank from and learning lessons there. But I'm curious, what has shifted in your life that's changed the perspective to allow you to look at things and say, hey, you know what, I don't need to have these fears kind of control how I react in life.
Well, I think when you've lived to the point where you've experienced a bunch of things, you've seen challenges and you've seen outcomes. And typically the things that we're most afraid of are things that we haven't done before, right? It's uncertainty and doubt. And that's only really it's really only a snapshot in time, right? And somehow, if you look, what happens is you look back over time and you say, it looked like a big chasm, and I'm not a really good long jumper, but somehow I made it over and I'm still alive, right? I didn't get sucked in, to the abyss. So I think, over time, you just get to the point and say, life is tough. Life has its challenges, but there's always a way through, over, or around.
I love that. And I'm assuming, because I think of myself 20, 25 years ago and how I looked at issues. Yeah, I definitely had those moments of fear, right? Like, gosh, how am I ever going to? And this is so insurmountable. But you're right, perspective, when we have a moment to sit back and look in the rearview mirror, Mike likes to share that scripture in 1 Samuel, right, where it talks about David, and Goliath, and him remembering, well, shoot, I killed a bear, I killed a lion. No, why not be able to do this? I mean, right. that ability to kind of remember really changes things.
Yeah, and then when you kind of look back at things, well, let's take fear of public speaking.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you look at times where you're really competent about the subject matter, right? It just seems so easy. It just flows, right?
Right.
But then, the times when you're a little uncertain and you think there's probably people in the audience that know a little bit more than you, and, they're going to be looking to see if you're dotting every I and crossing every T, right? Those, that fear comes into play. But as soon as you realize that we're not perfect, and if they're expecting perfection, that's their problem, not yours.
Right.
Is really what it comes down to.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. I mean, I think there's Mike and I were talking about the power that comes from being able to have a bigger, more eternal perspective, where we're looking at things maybe from a 50,000 foot view rather than just in the moment of panic, right? We allow ourselves to pull back. And for me, that's been an important lesson over the years, right? To be able to kind of step outside of it and say, okay, let's assess and see what this is really all about. Right. And is this really going to, put me in a spot that I can't overcome?
Right.
But yeah, I think it's too, there's an interesting, so Tony, you were sharing that the root of a lot of our fears is this thing that we haven't done before. Right. And so that gets me into thinking about, there's a Jack London quote that's kind of bouncing around in my head these days. He says, "The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time, right? And as we use our time and live our lives and actually seek out those things we haven't done yet, there's less to be afraid of.
Well, and also we know we're getting older and we don't live forever on this earth. And there are beautiful things that we can do on this earth. And when you start to realize that you have less and less time, hopefully the people that want to get the most out of life are saying, I've got to do these things and I've got to do more of them. And by the way, I actually get the opportunity to learn more when I do things rather than exist.
All right. So we're going to actually, I can tell you, Tyler, why I love Tony. We can get into Tony's life, but I'm going to actually start with, this is the richest men in town, right? The richest men in town. It's about living that rich life. Tony, in your life, can you share with us, paint us a picture of a day, of a moment when you truly felt rich?
Well, there's so many, Mike. I've got obviously a lot of business ones and a lot of personal ones. And I'm going to use a business one. So back in 1997, I was chief operating officer of a public company, about 500 employees, about 150 million in sales. And the company had been losing money. And over a couple of years, we built it up to, it was at the point where it was really profitable. And all of a sudden we had some new people buy the company, and there just wasn't a good cultural match. They were buying it because they wanted a public company to do other things with. So I kind of got, it wasn't a good alignment for me. And I left. And it was really, really hard for me. But I've got to tell you that so many people, now this is 25 years ago. I still get people emailing me or LinkedIn or Facebook saying, that few years when we had that company and turned it around was the best time in my life, because everybody knew why they were there. It was a mutual respect, no matter where you were and what you did in the company, and everything was transparent. We would share everything with everybody because we wanted them to think of ways to contribute. And, so that legacy lives with me today. So that gets me. If that isn't richness, I don't know what is.
I love it.
Well, and it's courage too, because I can feel it. You're carrying that in your heart, and you walked away from it.
Yeah,
we talk about alignment. We talk a lot about alignment a lot. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say. It's a lot harder to do when life is out of alignment to actually make a change.
Yeah, and in my life, I've had a number of cases where I could have done much better myself financially, but I typically stayed with companies because I felt so strongly about the people, right? And wanted to make sure if I left, it was right for the people. In my work career, I always looked at everything. There's 500 jobs. If I don't do my job, they don't eat. There's 35,000 jobs. If my team doesn't do their job, 35,000 people, some of them aren't going to eat. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of pressure, but it's also very fulfilling. And when the people you work with look at you and can see that you're looking through it through that lens, it's even more valuable.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Tyler, I meet Tony through some mutual friends of ours, right? So I'm hanging out one day with Rajiv. I meet Stephen Mitchell. I meet Carol Wirtz, and in walks Tony G. He's running the build. He's kind of running we're in a venture hub, if that makes sense, right? So it's a startup place in town, and we've got some office space that we're using for this project. And Tony walks in, and Rajiv's like, "Hey, you got to meet Tony," and instantly fall in love with this guy, right? There's two kinds of people in the world. There are builders and there are murmurers. Tony's a builder. And I think throughout his life, we'll learn more about it tonight, but everywhere he goes, he builds, and he builds by building up the people around him. And Tony, I'm so appreciative of the work that you've done, the work that you've helped us do, and the work that you've done for the community that we live in. So I'm just excited that you said yes to the invitation of the Richest Men. So let's do it.
Well, thank you for that. But it's been a labor of love the whole way. The journey has been fabulous, and hopefully I got a little bit more to go.
That sounds like you got some miles to go there. So that's good. So we're
just got I got a set of new tires.
Yeah, there you go.
So Tony, we're in an elevator, and I got 2 minutes. Who's Tony?
Well, I would say that I'm a work in progress, probably as most people are, right? On all fronts. Obviously, my business career has been a big part of that. Family has always been extremely important to me, and we'll talk a little bit about my upbringing hopefully later, and you'll see how that's I think an important underpinning to me, but I think also to a lot of my generation, right? And I think there's generational differences that have occurred over the last few generations, right? But I think ultimately where I am now, it's more about taking my knowledge and experience, and maybe not building new things, Mike, but supporting people in building their things and their success, right? Because I feel like that's amplification, that's leverage, right? Take whatever little bit I can share and try and have it replicated and multiplied.
Well, that's legacy, I think, as well, right? On some level, when we're able to impact others and help them impact their trajectory, right? And get to a higher place. I love that. It's
that Yo-Yo Ma quote we've talked about a couple episodes ago. It's not about proving anything. It's about sharing something.
Right. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think that might be a season thing. There might have been a time, Tony, as you look back, where there was a time where you were trying to prove something, and that's not now. Right?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. And, earlier in my career, in my 20s, I didn't complete college, right? And I'm competing out there in this world with all these people that had a lot of pedigrees. And so I had to be faster, quicker, maybe not smarter, but at least, have a good play on the field, right? Where I could maneuver and excel in a way where it offset the fact that I didn't have that educational background.
Yeah. Maybe out hustle some folks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, I had track shoes instead of tires.
I love it. Hey, Tony, I'm curious. I do want to. I would like to go take things back, and I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about where you came from and what those influences looked like for you as a young boy and your family and growing up, and kind of what makes you who you are.
Yeah, I'd love to share that, because it's it really is a story that in some ways doesn't exist in the same way anymore. So I was born in 1955, so a child of the 60s, if you would, right? And I grew up on Long Island in New York, and we had a home that we bought when I was 5 years old in a place called Levittown. I don't know if you've ever heard of Levittown, but there are 3 Levittowns in the world.
Okay.
And this Levittown was a development that was built on potato fields on Long Island to serve veterans returning from World War II.
Wow.
So basically, they're little 750 square foot houses on 60 by 100 plots. And it's basically, that little area is 85,000 people. And like 1,700 different little roads and kids everywhere, right?
That's awesome. Schools
everywhere. And when I grew up, there was a time when kids would leave in the morning if it wasn't a school day. Well, if it was a school day, you walked to school, whether it's a mile or a mile and a half. You didn't take the bus unless it was a trek, right? And even at 5 and 6 years old, you'd walk. And on days when it wasn't school, you'd leave, at 8 a.m. and you were good as long as you were back by dinner. If mom said 6 o'clock is dinner, you're good. Nobody worried about you. I'd get on my bike. We used to have, you guys probably don't remember these little Stingray bikes. They're 20-inch tires with a banana seat and a big sissy bar on the back. And we didn't have bungee cords then. I had to tie it with a string, but I tie all my fishing gear up, my pail, my rods and reels, and ride down to the pier, even when I was 7 and 8, about 7 or 8 miles away. Wow. And fish. And, every day was playing out in the street or at the schoolyard, whether it was touch football or street hockey or basketball. And then all the kids' games at night, after dinner when you could go back out when it was dark. But, it was great. You're just always around kids, always having fun, always Sunday dinners with the family, and a very hierarchical family. My mother's father, the patriarch, right? Every Sunday, we'd all be over there for dinner, okay? And it would be a fabulous dinner, and he always had the coolest stuff, right? He owned his own business. He had like the first Sony Betamax and the first color TV. But I'm going to tell you something. We would have dinner at like 3 p.m., but from like 11 to 2:30, he had a job for you. You were mixing cement, hauling rocks, painting houses, but you were learning stuff too, Yeah. He had the nicest house in the neighborhood. But yeah, so
brothers and sisters.
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of 4, and so I have a brother 2 years younger than me, a brother 7 years younger than me, and then a sister 14 years younger than me. So when I was in high school, I was the built-in babysitter, right? And we all lived in this 750 square foot house with one bathroom.
Okay, wow. Can we just replay that, right? We talked a little bit about generational differences.
Right.
Family with 4 kids living in a 750 square foot house.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you know your house? Did you know that? I mean, did you know any different?
Well, you got to remember, we had 1,700 blocks of these houses in the neighborhood I lived in, right? Just unbelievable. So we lived on this one block, and then my mom's sister, my mom's brother, and my mom's mom lived on another block about 3 miles away in the same neighborhood, Levittown. And on that block, there were 96 kids. All the families had 6 kids, 7 kids, 8 kids, 1 and 2 had 9 kids, right? So, it's a totally different way of growing up, right?
Tyler, are you picturing the Gould family living in a 750 square foot house? How's that picture?
No, it is so different, and I just think even like, the times when my kids have had to share a room, they were like, when do I get my own room? Like waiting for the next kid to get bounced out of the house, but yeah, it's such a different time. I'm loving the scene of that. And I'm wondering, Tony, when you think back on your childhood and the freedom that you had and sort of this opportunity to be creative and create, is there something that when you look at today, you have a grandkids 5 and 3, and you think, gosh, this is what I wish that they had, this little piece?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's such a different life. I even look at my kids. My kids didn't have the same upbringing. You try to, right? Yeah. But in some ways, my kids are so much more sheltered than I was. And they actually thank me for it because, they look at some of their friends that had freedoms too early in this world, right? And I think the big difference is you could go out and, be a little kid in my generation, and parenting was totally different. The neighbor could reprimand you.
Right.
The neighbor could give you a swat on the bottom. And what would happen is if that happened, you go back home, and if you told the story to your dad, he'd swat you because the other guy had to do something because you weren't behaving. It was a totally different thing, right? But it just seemed like there was so much more trust around the community about bringing up kids and protecting kids, whereas now it seems like every set of parents is on their own.
Yeah.
Right? And unfortunately, it gets difficult because there are so many different views of parenting. You know, one parent wants the support of others, another says, hey, don't even talk to my kid. I'm going to be the one that controls, how they're brought up. And it makes it difficult to navigate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that whole idea of community, right? I do feel like, and Mike, you and I have talked about this, maybe on this show even.
I'm having some deja vu.
Right. I kind of feel like, and there's moments where I feel like, gosh, the sense of community is definitely, it's changed even from when I was a kid, right? It's just different. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes I find myself nostalgic on a certain level where I'm like, gosh, I wish that my own children could have experienced some of these things that I experienced that required a little more freedom. Because I remember the same thing, like neighbor gets after you. My only thought was, gosh, I hope my parents don't find out that the neighbor got after me. Right. So I better straighten it up and be good, but yeah, it's
well, I think of trade-offs, right? Like what have we lost in the name of progress, right? Or in the name of, right. I mean, of comfort, of maybe a richness, a material comfort, and what's on the other end of that bargain. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're winning. I think of this computer that I have in my pocket. Mm-hmm. And Tony in 1955, it was probably taking up the basement of a Pentagon building or something.
Yeah, an old Sperry Univac.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's things that we're gaining, but man, there might be some things that we're losing, and you can't roll it back, right? I can't be like, okay, kids, we're going to sell our house and we're going to go get that 800 square foot thing, and we're going to get cozy. Like
it's sort of that T.S. Eliot quote, right? Where is the wisdom that we've lost in knowledge? And, and I think, I don't know, there is a bit of a balance. Like, I'm in Southern California, and I think that it's definitely, you don't know your neighbors all that well, and unless you really put an effort into it. And there is sort of this idea that we need to insulate everyone from everything. And on some level, I push back on that a little bit as a parent, right? Because I want my kids to have freedom. I want them to be able to make choices and informed choices, right? And learn from those. And so it's tough to balance that, though. I mean,
fear is in that.
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
Are afraid of strangers, or people are afraid of, the ice cream truck driving through the neighborhood. Where when I was a kid, that's a drop everything, right?
Oh yeah.
Now we're like, ooh, I don't know, adult playing music, selling ice cream, sketchy. Sounds sketchy.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest differences is that, at least in that neighborhood, but it was just like a lot of neighborhoods on Long Island and maybe a lot of other places, there were a lot of intact families with one earner, right? Mm-hmm. So typically the mom was always home. All the moms were home, and they weren't necessarily driving the kids back and forth to school, but they were home and they'd go have coffee with this neighbor and that neighbor and this neighbor. And they were closely knit because they had these deep relationships just because they spent time together, and they were able to talk about their issues and share their problems and basically just build trust, right? And that's the different, I think, the thing that's really different today.
Tell us about your father. What was his name?
Okay, so his real name was Nunzio. Okay,
I love that name,
Nunzio, and my mom's name was Alfonsina. Okay,
let's go.
But they were called Vinny and Francis. Okay, Fran.
You know what? Sign me up for that Sunday dinner any day.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk to me about him.
I wish I could play it. Actually, I have this video that I took of my mom before I have a bunch of little videos. One where she's making the meatballs, the family recipe. I watch it all the time. I crack up.
Oh man,
my mouth's
that's
watering.
Priceless. Oh my gosh, I love that.
But yeah, my dad, he, believe it or not, the 750 square feet and 4 people, that was luxury. My dad grew up in an apartment in Manhattan, and he had 10 brothers and sisters.
Oh,
and it was a small apartment. So I think the 750 for him was like a palace.
Yeah.
But, he was a hardworking guy. Not a man of many words, but, a lover, man. He would give you the biggest bear hugs. He would not let you go, right? Mm-hmm. And he worked a lot of long hours. And, but the interesting thing there is, even though I didn't get to see him a lot during the work week, as I grew older, he ended up working for this family business I talked about that my grandfather had. It was actually a retail fish business in Queens, New York. And my dad worked in there, and it was long hours and all that. And when I got to be 10 years old, I started working there Fridays after school because, fish on Fridays with the Catholics, it's a busy time, right?
Yeah.
And then I'd work there all day Saturday, and Saturday was the big cleanup day. So we would scrub everything from the moldings on the ceiling down, and, you wanted a clean place, a fish business that was clean and sparkly.
And you're 10 years old.
I'm 10 years old, right? And my first day's pay was a nickel. And then when I came back, it was a quarter. And that was great because you could buy 5 candy bars then for a quarter. They were a nickel a piece. But so I worked in there on and off for 7 years. And during the summers, I worked in there full time. So I really got a chance to see my dad as a man interact with the public, right? And I saw what a hard worker he was. And that just gets to me. He's just a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah, it feels a little like that. Like that fish market might be like the building and loans.
Yeah.
Right? It's
a little bit.
A
little bit. The whole fish market experience was really important to me because, obviously I got to work with my dad. My grandmother and grandfather worked there on Friday afternoons. They were selling the store to their son, right? Mm-hmm. So I got to spend time with them. My uncle bought it from them, so he was there full time, and we did a lot of things with him on our days off. And then I had some great aunts and uncles, probably about 6 or 7, who would work there from time to time. So it was really a family operation, and it was just really a wonderful experience. But I also have to say that it was wonderful for another reason. And not everybody gets to experience this, but that neighborhood turned over a period of, I'm going to say 10 years, from a totally white neighborhood to a totally black neighborhood, right? And so most of the time I was there, probably 5 of those years, our clientele was 100% black. Okay. So it was wonderful because really what I got to experience is that 2% of our population are criminals and are in prison. And 2% of the black population that would come into that store and do bad things or try and steal things, it was 2%. And the other 98 were wonderful people, right? So, it just puts things in perspective because you hear stereotypes of this and this with races and colors and all that. But the reality is good people are good people, bad people are bad people. And it was quite evident, for me during that time.
I love that. Tony, in looking back on your time growing up and, running around the neighborhood and with in the fish shop, what are some lessons that stand out to you that your mom and dad taught you that stick with you?
Yeah. So family is extremely important. but getting together is just as important, right? You know, it's great to say, I'm going to talk to you on the phone, or I'm going to see you at holidays, but you know, you really get the maximum benefit out of your family when you're part of their daily life, right? And in some ways, we've lost a little bit of that too, because we've become a much more transient population, capitalizing on opportunities. You know, we have people that go away from school for school, and then they find a job next to school because they did a intern program or whatever, or they liked it there. And it's great. It's, you know, it's probably expanding a lot of horizons, but it doesn't create that very strong, tightly knit, you know, you can depend on that family for anything. And honestly, it's almost like knowing that God, you know, will take care of you, that he's always there. Well, it's nice to also have your earthly family always there too, and to know it because you experience it, you know, day to day. So I was very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know if kids these days listen to me, right? But like proximity to home, proximity to family, I don't even know if that's on the list of criteria. You know, I hope
sometimes I hear people kids. I want to live at least 20 minutes away from. You know, you hear that, right? Because they're afraid they're going to get involved in your life. But having that support can be a blessing if you let it happen.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, that is a big deal. And I think that, gosh, you know, I was just having this conversation with my eldest daughter. You know, she's at college, right? So she's away. And I was just telling her, you know, she was going through some stuff. And I said, look, we're here always. Like, this is your castle anytime. And I think that there's comfort in that, right? We know we can spread our wings and we can do our thing, but we have this group of people that's built in that is going to be there for us no matter what. I love those lessons. That's great.
So that young Tony, what did he dream of?
Well, you know, when I was a kid, I'm not sure I really knew what possibilities there were for me. And when you guys were doing the ZMAD program, I kind of thought about, you know, after talking and meeting a lot of those kids, that they were also in that same situation. They have no idea. They couldn't take themselves and pop them into something else and say, I could actually be in that spot someday. That is a possibility for me, right? So in some ways, you know, my parents were very loving and all that, but we were sheltered. We didn't have a lot of money. I didn't get on a plane until I was 21. The only restaurants we ever went to was McDonald's and Wetson's, which Wetson's was like the big competitor back then of McDonald's, you know, and they both had you could buy 12-cent hamburgers, 10-cent fries, and 10-cent Cokes.
Oh, man.
Right? So, you know, that was our eating out. We didn't have a lot of money to do things like, you know, that maybe some other families had, but that was okay. But it also, and my parents were not educated beyond high school. And, you know, they had jobs that they were very good at, and they were very hardworking, but they were not jobs that exposed them to the bigger world. So by default, you know, my exposure, and I would read the newspaper every day and magazines and things like that, but it wasn't really clear to me how I would get there. That didn't happen until later on.
I'm just wondering, did you feel like growing up you were missing anything?
No, not at all. I felt it was a very full life. We had a lot of friends. You know, I got to tell you, growing up in a neighborhood like that and having people that are different ages, you know, in your family and brothers and sisters, you know, there are people all over. And my mom passed in 2016, and she was 87 years old. And she was still having people that went to grade school, junior high, and high school coming by. Hey, Miss G, how you doing? You need anything? You know, it's just unbelievable. We just don't see that now, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing.
And I'm talking about a lot of people, not 2 or 3. I'm talking 15 to 25 people like that.
So I'm wondering what faith looked like growing up?
Yeah, I'm not sure I really understood it. So we were brought up Catholic. We went to church. I went to a public school, but we always went to, Friday afternoon catechism. And then when we got into junior high, we went to confraternity. We had our Holy Communion and we had our confirmation and all of that. But it was, and I believed in God. I didn't know God. Priests always didn't seem human to me. I don't know. They were, they didn't seem like men, right? They didn't have like normal lives. And we kind of went through the motions. And it wasn't until I actually started going to different churches. The next couple of times that in my life where I had periods of going to churches, they were Lutheran churches, which is a little more latitude away from all the Catholic doctrine, and the pastors were married, and you'd see them at the sporting events, and they were more like people, which to me it made it more comfortable to be a part of things. And it wasn't really until like the last 15 years or so where I really started to understand that, God's word is in the Bible. The Bible is for us. It's not just for the church officials, and that if you look in the Bible and understand what it's saying, number one, it's an owner's manual for a human being, but it's an invitation, right, to a totally different relationship with God than the one I didn't have, as a Catholic growing up.
So I'm always fascinated by people's faith journey. Mm-hmm. Can you point to a time where you knew or you learned that God knew who Tony was?
I don't think I can. I think it was very gradual for me, Mike. And I think, that as I started to realize, I think I love this one. I think Steve Mitchell even referenced Ephesians 2:8, right? Where I really started to realize that, even though I'm trying to do all this good in the world and it's probably a good thing, that's not the measure of what's going to get me into heaven, right? God's love is, right? But I also parse that because, you could do good things on earth and they're all good for the people that get the benefit of it, right? But sometimes you do it out of obligation. Sometimes you do it out of loyalty. And I think those are all good, but the ones that God will really see is the ones you do out of love, out of pure love, right?
It's that gift that's given, right? How is it given? Is it like, here's your present and begrudgingly, and you don't want to be there, someone made you be there, versus like, no, like I love you. Here's a present, right? I think that's powerful. I love your answer too, because there are folks that can point to a moment. There are folks that, like you said, gradual, drip by drip, slowly over time, that relationship builds, and maybe those eyes are opened up to,
and I don't think one is better than the other.
No,
I mean, the reality is, right, as long as we get there, that's the point, right?
Well, they're as different as many people God's created, I think,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like it's a fingerprint, right? It's a pathway. I think that you're right. I think that's fascinating and blows my mind.
But I am curious, Tony, about you mentioned, about 15 years ago, you started to have this realization that, God's word is in the Bible, and it's this owner's manual. I'm sure, if you backtracked even further, you'd say, well, there's a lot of moments that sort of led to that. But what in at that point in your life, what led you to that point where you were kind of digging a little deeper?
I think it was the pastor that we had at that time. And I think in a lot lot of ways,
what's his name? What was his name?
Oh, his name is Al Castle. He's not in town anymore. He's actually in a suburb of Phoenix. And I still listen to them every once in a while. And, and there's been other people along the way too, people that worked for me, right, in high tech, who quit these powerful jobs. Two guys I know that, they became pastors at churches. And I was listening, with the internet, you can listen to anybody you want to, right? So,
right.
Just listening to them. And then, probably where it's really started to take even the strongest foothold was about 10 years ago. So about 10 years ago, when our kids, probably 12 years ago, our kids were in the youth group at the Lutheran church that we went to here in town. And the youth group, we were involved in it during their confirmation years, junior high, but, they didn't want to hang around with people like us in high school, right? So, but for some reason, that group was a good group, but they wanted more. And so my kids actually started to go to the youth group at Little Country. So they were going to both. And then over time, they said, Mom and Dad, would you mind if we go to church over there? And Kelly and I are looking at each other going, you guys want to go to church? Wherever you want to go, we'll go.
Right.
You like that. And that's more of a cavalry-based, Bible-based scenario where, the service is purely probably 30% praise, and the rest is a Bible study, right? And along that, and probably started a little earlier, my beautiful bride, Kelly, she started, reading in the Bible every morning, right? And sometimes she'd read to me and we'd talk about it. And then over time, we started reading devotionals every morning. Now we try and do like 5 devotionals every morning. A couple of the ones that are uplifting, but then, I'm reading out of C.S. Lewis or Oswald Chambers, those kind of guys. So it just, the more, and we've been doing more Bible studies, honestly, with the community. Mike, I think I mentioned that we've done a couple of couple studies with some people.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it's just a group of 4 couples. We've all been married over 30 years. One of the couples has been married 50 years. They were high school sweethearts. And
hard to compete with that.
Yeah. Hey, it's in today's world, to make it. But, what we love about it is that the group, so 3 of the couples have known each other for 20 years. Okay. And one's fairly new to the community, and they're almost my next door neighbor, but they kind of fit right in. And what we love about it is it's a very intimate group. I mean, you can talk about everything. And let's face it, every marriage has issues, right? There is no easy marriage, okay? I'm going to say, I won't say they're tough, but every marriage takes work. And love, when I talk to young people and they tell me, well, I'm not in love with them anymore. I'm going like, you have no idea. Love is not a feeling. Right. Love is not a feeling. When they say they're not in love anymore, I always tell them love is an action. And by 2 people being loving and doing acts of love for each other, whether it's bringing coffee to you in the morning or, just the simple things, that creates the feeling, okay, of being in love. But the feeling just isn't there, right? It comes from the action. And what's that Kirk Cameron movie? With the 40 days, he does an act of love for 40 days to try and rebuild his marriage, and then all of a sudden, after 20 or 25 days, his wife starts reciprocating. Right? That's the perfect example. That is the way it works.
Well, I think love is a commandment, and if it's a commandment, it's a choice. You choose to love. There's some agency there, right? So this whimsical, we fell in love, he swept me off my feet, and 23 years later, if you're banking on those feelings, right, there needs to be there needs to be some choice.
I love that idea of love as an action, because it sounds a lot like work, right? I mean, if we want to get to that point where we're in love with our spouses or with our children or with those people that are close to us, it looks a whole lot like service, doesn't it? Just
it does.
Well, it looks a whole lot like charity, right?
Yeah.
It's not about puffing yourself up. It's not about your needs over their needs. It's you're gonna love your bride like Christ loved the church, right? I mean, you're gonna lay it down. You're gonna sacrifice.
Yeah, well, back to what we said before, giving out of love, not obligation or loyalty, and you may do that every once in a while, right? If it's the only way you can get it done, but it's not going to have the same impact until you're doing it out of love.
So before we dive in, I've got a couple of questions for you going into that when did Tony's eyes open up to possibilities, right? Of what this life might be able to offer you. Do you have, I remember when my daughter got baptized, right? She was 8 years old and I gave her a set of scriptures. And in those set of scriptures, I had gone with a scripture marker pencil and I drew a red heart. I drew a red heart on verses that are written on my heart, right? That like, Grace, you cut me open. That is here. Life experience, whatever. Maybe it was just a moment with the Holy Ghost, but like, I know those things are true. And so as you turn through her scriptures, you'll see these red hearts drawn on these verses. Can you give me one, Tony? Can you give me something that's written on your heart?
I would say one I really love is Matthew 6:63 about don't worry, right? Where he says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, about your body, what you will wear, et cetera. I don't remember the exact words, but it's all about the fact that we spend so much time, right, thinking about the future when our life is in the present, right? And yes, the past is there to learn from, but the future will take care of itself, right? As long as we're living in the present. If we do the things that we need to do, do your share, cast your care kind of thing, right? That's all you can do. And if we talked about fear and things like that and uncertainty, sometimes that's because we're looking past the present into the future, right? Where God basically says, I'll bear that burden for you.
Nothing more precious than time. And I just worry sometimes how much of this precious commodity we're spending worrying about things we can't control. And everyone will say, oh yeah, don't only focus on those things you can control. But we're all spending this precious finite resource worrying about things that we just can't control. Kind of going, Tyler, into those thoughts that we opened the show with on fear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're afraid of things and none of it is useful energy spent because we can't control it.
Well, and none of it, I want to say none of it, but the vast majority of it will not come out the way you envisioned it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Tony. So you mentioned earlier about these possibilities and how growing up, you just really couldn't even see possibilities or how you would even access some of these things that maybe you dreamed about as a kid. And then you said later on that would change.
Right.
Help me understand that process.
Yeah. So when I graduated from high school, I went to work for the Internal Revenue Service, right? And I worked, it was more, more of a clerical position, but, I was a curious guy in school and I always did good in school. And I was always looking at the way things worked. And I found so many things in the IRS that could be fixed with like minor IT changes, right? So here I am, this little punk 17, 18-year-old guy constantly going over to IT saying, if you guys change this field here or change this document like this, The process would be so much more streamlined. We'd have to do 15 less steps. We'd be able to serve the taxpayer so much more. The filing systems would be so much better, but they just looked at me as a bratty little kid, right? And I applied for so many jobs when I was at the IRS. I was there for 4 years. And the process was always, you'd have an interview and a test. And so many jobs, tens of 20, 30, 40, I don't know. But it was a lot of jobs. And finally I went to HR and I said, do you have the records on my testing and my interviews? And they showed them to me, and they're like, yeah, your interviews are always in the top 3, sometimes the top 1 or 2. Your test scores were great. And I just figured it was because I was the young punk kid who thought he knew too much, right? So they just, I was probably a pest at that point to them, right? Because they didn't really want to make any of these changes. So eventually when I was 21.
They didn't want to be efficient, Tony.
They're still struggling. They're still struggling with that.
So one of my aunts, believe it or not, was working at a computer terminal company. And she goes, I got an opening over here. I think you'd be great. Why don't you come over here and check it out? And I did. And I worked in that company, and I got a lot of really great feedback from people, right? And then I started supporting some of our sales guys who were our best sales guys. And as I started to learn more about their customers and the business, I started to say to them, guys, I will take on more of the day-to-day work that you do with your clients so you can go out and get new clients, right? And that happened, and they did really, really well. And I kept getting more positive feedback. And then I started looking at all these sales guys, and back in those days in technology, you made a lot of money as a sales guy, right? And I'm telling you, they're wearing alligator shoes, they're driving around in Rolls Corniches, all this stuff. And after I'm supporting these clients, I'm thinking to myself, these guys are no smarter than me. I mean, I think I could do what they could do. And so I actually started knocking on the national sales manager's door every Friday morning at 10 o'clock. And he didn't really, I did it for a year, Mike, a year. And he didn't have a lot of confidence in me. He didn't really know me.
Every Friday
at 10 o'clock, knocked on his door, right? So I think at one point, he was just trying to get rid of me. So he had just hired 8 new salespeople, and they were going to have a meeting in Chicago. And he says to me, it's like 8 in the morning. And he goes, I'm going to Chicago today. I'm leaving LaGuardia Airport at 11:30. If you want to come to the meeting, you can. He's figuring I'm going to say, how am I going to do that, right? I go, I absolutely will. I go speeding home, pack a bag. And I get to the airport, and I'm on the plane. He's going, holy mackerel, right? So then I go to this meeting, and there's all these salespeople. And, he goes around the room, and he asks each of them to talk about the company, okay? So they're kind of fumbling around and all that. And then he asks them to talk about the products, right? And then at the end, he's looking over at me, right? The little punk kid that he's tried to blow off, right? And he goes, do you want to try it, right? So I said, yeah, absolutely, right? So the company, I knew way more than all these people because they were new, and I was working in the nuts and bolts inside, right? So I do the company talk, and I could see him change his attitude towards me right away, right? So then he asked me to do the product one, and I didn't know anything about the products, and I just made stuff up, right? I just tried to be really comfortable and just made stuff up. And, all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, he said, if you want to move to San Francisco, I have a job for you.
Wow.
How old were you?
23.
So I'm assuming you packed a bag and jumped to San Francisco.
Absolutely did. Yeah.
So we talked, Tony, on this program an awful lot about hinge moments, right? A hinge moment is a conversation, an opportunity door opens, and everything changes.
Right.
Have you thought about what your life would be like if you didn't make that flight to Chicago?
Oh yeah. My life has been just blessed. I've been able to do so many of the things that I enjoy. And I think it's kind of interesting the way God works, because I think naturally I enjoy them. I don't enjoy them just because I'm getting the chance to do them. This is part of my nature. And he just put me in a place where I could live an abundant life and things that I was going to enjoy. So
like live in those gifts, right? I mean, early on, IRS, you see process,
right?
You see inefficiencies,
right?
That these older folks just don't see.
I'm impressed by the tenacity of the whole process, right? I feel like, that walking into the boss's up to his door every Friday for a year and knocking on the door and having a conversation about, an opportunity you'd like to take advantage of. That is there's something about that, the ability to handle that rejection, even, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, it wasn't easy. I can assure you it wasn't easy.
Well, what were you chasing? Were you chasing the fancy shoes? Were you chasing something inside of you? Like what was your motivation going to that door every morning at 10 o'clock, every Friday morning at 10?
Yeah, I think I found that I really loved working with clients and helping solve their problems. And the other thing is the sales guy that I supported for the most part, that did real well because I took some of his burden on. He was really an excellent mentor for me. And he was promoted to regional manager in San Francisco. So we had those things going on in concert, right? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to get to do something new. I'm going to expand on something that I'm already enjoying. And now I'm going to live in the same city as a guy that's become a mentor for me.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
Tony, can I drill down on one aspect of that story that I've actually been thinking a lot about? I've been thinking about the courage to correct. And you mentioned the value of feedback. Talk to me about what feedback has meant in your life.
Oh, it's everything, because it's a long process to try and build confidence on what you get out of your accomplishments. But if people along the way are giving you positive feedback, in addition to coaching and things like that, they're helping you see the progress that you're making. It helps to accelerate your progress, right? And that's one of the things I like about, where I am now, about being able to support people. And I still believe I don't do it enough. I mean, I should be doing it more in everyday life on the street, right? When I see somebody doing something, I try and do it, but I'm going to do even more of it, because it is unbelievable. It changes people's lives, right? The Bible says that, the tongue has the power of life and death, right? It's really true. I mean, you can just light a fire under somebody of hope and belief in themselves just by a few words that are attached to the right moment in time that amplifies what they're doing, their own experience.
Yeah, Tyler, I don't know if you saw my post the other day, but shout out to John Brandyberg. I shared out Zaffron's 3 laws of performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's an eternal truth. The 3 laws go something like this. People see reality. Their reality is how they experience it. They experience it through language. Law number 3, use generative language to reshape how people experience life.
Oh, I love that.
Right? The power of a word. There's been a moment when I've been down and someone has whispered in my ear, generative language, reminding me that maybe I'm a son of God, reminding me that, yeah, that wasn't my best moment, but there's going to be great moments ahead. And that has made all of the difference. Right? And so I think that Tyler, we're always talking about that internal script. What's running between your ears? What do you tell yourself? What kind of self-talk, right? Your identity, your worth, all of those things. But those things are impressed upon us with words that other people have shared about us.
We were talking about fear earlier. And one of the things that you and I had mentioned was the people that we surround ourselves with, right? I mean, overcoming some of that fear it's great to be able to do that internally, right? And pull yourself up by the bootstraps and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. But I think having the right people around you, like you mentioned, Tony, mentors and people that are willing to kind of cheer you on and say, hey, I'm a believer in what Tony's got going on right now. So just keep pushing forward and good things are going to happen. I mean, that's a powerful thing to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then sometimes you get really lucky and you have somebody who it does all of that you just said, Tyler, and then throw some gravel on a muddy path for you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I had that situation with, like I said, I did not have an undergraduate degree. Right. And it was a challenge in some ways, in my career. And I mentioned that when I worked for that company, I was a COO of a public company. And, you kind of need a pedigree in a lot of cases to get there. And so I had a gentleman that I worked with who was very educated. His name was Joe Joy. And, he went to Georgetown and then he got his executive MBA at Columbia, right? And we worked very closely together and we both had very high regard for each other. And so when he got through with this executive program at Columbia, he said to me, he goes, you should go through that program. I go, well, Joe, I don't have a bachelor's degree. And he goes, you would add so much to that program. He said, I'm going to go talk to the people at Columbia. Right. And I said, Joe, I don't know if that's going to do anything. Right. So he goes,
you don't have a bachelor's degree and he's going to go talk to a graduate program.
The executive MBA.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes. So he goes and he talks to them and gets a meeting set up for me. And I think they were just doing it in a lot of ways because he had done some things for the school. He had helped them with some case studies and things like that. But anyway, I got a meeting and we started to talk and, I'd been a salesman my whole life. So I put my salesman's hat on and I'm trying to sell them what value I could bring.
Sounds like Joe did too.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He really did. He really did. Well, and I'll tell you more because he did more selling, but I was able to get the meeting with them and, then they started saying, well, this is a tough program. We're not really sure if you can make it through.
We're Columbia, right? This is Columbia.
Right. That's right. And I, using my normal sales tactics is always about overcoming objections, but you can't overcome them if you don't know what they are, right? So trying to get them into specific things, right? So it primarily was, well, you got to take the GMAT because that's the test where we know you have a basic level to be able to be in the program. And then we need you to take statistics and we need you to take calculus and we need you to do I needed to take 3 classes and I needed to get A's. And I said to them, so if I do these things, I come back, then I'm in the program. And they're looking at me like, oh, I go, yeah, because they didn't think I was gonna. I went out and did those things. And then I came back and they let me in, which was great. It was really a great experience. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. And it was one of those things where I was in my 40s and most of the other people in the program were in the 28, 27. They had good jobs and things like that, but I'm running a public company. I had a lot to bring to the table and it was really a fun experience. And then my buddy, Mr. Joy, who I ended up founding a company with later on, he continued to sell internally and he got my education paid for by the company.
Oh my God, I love that. Wow, that is
what a blessing that was.
Yeah.
So Tony G is sitting here as a Columbia executive MBA graduate without a bachelor's for free.
It is kind of unbelievable, isn't it?
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the people that bet that Tony won't do something. That's a mistake. Right? I bet he won't do this. Well, watch me.
But I also love the intersection of lives, and how those things create. Sometimes you get the right person and there's synergy there, and
Right.
and there's this belief in what you're capable of, and maybe they're, Tony, I could just hear you saying, well, yeah, that sounds amazing, but I don't have a bachelor's degree, right?
Right.
And this guy saying, well, you've got more than that, and I think it's
Yeah, almost like that. Let me loan you my belief in you. You know what I mean? Or
yeah, absolutely.
Right. And you'd have to know Joe, because Joe is he was a college debater. He is an excellent public speaker. He is one of the most motivating, inspiring speakers you will ever meet. Right. So, just spending a few minutes with him can just light anyone's fire. And, he's just a guy that I respect immensely. And it's kind of funny because since I've known him, since I've been, 29, okay, I've watched his faith journey as well. And he's a totally different person than he was 35 years ago.
I can think of no better compliment for a friend than what you just said. He's a different person, right? We're changing, we're evolving, we're learning, we're developing. Because to me, that's the gospel, right? Mm-hmm. That's the gospel. He loves us where we are, but he's not intending to leave us there. Mm-hmm. And I love that tribute. I think that's a great way to tribute and honor a friend. Somewhere in there, a lady comes into your life, Tony.
Yes, my beautiful bride, Kelly. We've been married for 34 years. We met.
Get it right. Get it right.
We met when I lived in the Bay Area. That sales job, moving out to the Bay Area, and then my dad passed away kind of suddenly when he was 57. And I felt the urge to move back to New York and support that tightly knitted family. And Kelly and I kept our long distance relationship. You guys might be too young for People's Express. Do you remember People's Express?
I do not remember People's Express. No.
So People's Express was an airline that flew from Oakland to Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
And it was $98 each way. So that allowed us to continue a long distance relationship.
That was the one route they ran. That was it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
They didn't have a lot of routes.
That's
Can
amazing.
you talk about that urge? I love that the way you worded that. So your dad passes away and you feel an urge. Tyler, we talk about chains, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple kinds of change in life. There's those bad ones. We don't need to talk about those, like the Jacob Marley chains, but there's the chains we choose, right? There's those chains of obligation and duty. So what's going to, you meet a girl, you're sweet on a girl, your dad passes away, your heart's broken. Yeah. Walk me through that urge to move back home.
Yeah. So it was really mostly about my mom. Because, I know that they didn't have a lot of means. I know that he didn't have a lot of life insurance. And I just wanted to be close to her so that I could make sure that her life could be managed. My mom's a very capable person. As a matter of fact, as she got older, I learned how capable she was. For a woman that really never made a lot of money in her life, with her little envelope system, she had a little net worth that you'd never believe.
That's
right?
awesome.
It wasn't a lot of money, but I wouldn't expect her to have any money, right?
The little envelope budget system.
Tucking away a few dollars in envelopes, man. Oh man, I
when
love
the
that.
envelope's empty, you're done in that category, right?
Exactly.
That's amazing.
So she probably didn't need as much help as I thought.
But I love that idea, and I think you've talked so much about how important family is to you. And I think that when we're of that mindset, the willingness to sacrifice for those people that we love the most is kind of right at the surface, right? If someone has something that they need, I'm with you, Tony. I'd hop on a plane tomorrow. Where do I need to be? And I think that those experiences, they do good for the person that we go see, but maybe they do even more for us because we're willing to sacrifice something to be out there and learn with them. I think that's a great thing.
Well, it's a further brick on the house of the relationship, right? You just keep building on it, right? If you don't invest, there is no return, right?
Yeah, man.
Well, and it doesn't help. I mean, it's definitely not hurting seeing you be that dutiful son to Kelly, right?
Well, and in other things later in life, we train our kids by what we do too.
So, People's Express keeps the relationship going. You got King's Ransom and dimes of $98 you're dropping to keep love alive, and then where does it take you?
Well, so she eventually moves back, and we get married, and we stay in New York for about 11 or 12 years and what had happened, it was kind of interesting. We had put money down on this beautiful home, like the home of our dreams, right? We did. And I had just finished the Columbia MBA program. My wife just finished her master's as a nurse practitioner, and we were all packed, ready to move into this new house. Now, this is March. We're packed in March of 1997, and we're both going to finish our degrees in May. Okay. And then I have this discussion with my new boss, this new CEO, I told you when I left the company. And it just, culturally, it was just not going to work. And I had done a bunch of things that I felt were the right thing to do for the company, for the shareholders, and for the employees. And we had socialized it. Everybody felt good about it. There was some pain involved in it. But the pain was behind us, and we were moving forward. And then they wanted me to do one more thing. And I said, no, it's going to add like 0.01% to the bottom line, and it's going to undermine everything that we've just done. It's the wrong thing to do. And they go, well, you have to do it. And I just said, can you hold on for a minute? And I put the phone on hold, and I turned to Kelly. I was actually home at 4:30 that night because I had to get a tux on for a company-related black tie event. So both Kelly and I were home to get ready. And I just, a bunch of things had happened that week to lead to this. And I just said to her, Kelly, I know we bought this dream house, and, we have some young kids now, and you're just finishing your program. I'm just finishing my MBA, and we're all packed. If you ever want to go back to California, and that might, Reading might be a great place to raise our kids, I will tell them that get back on the phone and tell them I'm leaving right now. What do you want to do? And my beautiful bride, she thinks about it for a few minutes, and she is one of the boldest people you'll ever meet. And she goes, let's go for it. And I get back on the phone and say, guys, I'm done.
What? Wow.
And we finished. We went through May, finished our degrees and all that. And June 1st, we packed up the trucks and left.
Wow.
For California.
For California, for lovely Redding, California, 1997.
Wow. That's incredible. And now, what was the draw to Redding, California, Tony?
My beautiful bride is 5th generation Shasta County.
Wow.
And when I say 5th generation, that's an understatement because the first 3 generations had their firstborn at 43 years old. So I'm talking 1791, the wagon train arrived.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's incredible.
So her family still has a mill up in Oak Run. It's now in a conservation easement, but it still operates as a small business. This mill, well, first let me say the old uncles who grew up on that property, they didn't have a working toilet in the 1990s. They were still using an outhouse, right?
Oh,
in the 90s?
In the 90s. The whole mill, like the big buzz saws and everything, still operate on a steam boiler.
Wow.
And they have one of those big steam tractors for hauling the logs. It's a historical place in the county.
Yeah, this does not sound safe, Tony. That does not.
A lot of her great uncles do not have all of their fingers.
Oh my goodness, that's
moment,
amazing!
though.
I love that.
Right? What a moment! Your wife is like, let's go for it. What a liberating moment! And that you talked about that alignment, right? And just the courage to like, hey, if that feels wrong at any point, we're going to be true to each other, and we're gonna live the way that feels right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, there's this theme in running through everything that you're talking about, Tony. And you've talked a lot about relationships, and I think that when we're invested in those relationships and we're putting the time and the energy into those relationships, there's some depth there that we, you begin to see each other, right? You understand each other in a different way. And Mike talks about alignment. I love that word. I think it's so important. And I think when we're investing in each other and we're really, we have someone else's best interest in mind, that alignment starts to come around pretty quick.
Yeah. And I think that whole story also ties to, when you say alignment, let's say the tight coupling of a community or a family. So if you think about it, New York changed as I grew up. When I went back to New York, as an adult, some of my family, especially my cousins who all were part of that close-knit, they had moved away and things like that. And people in the neighborhood, were no longer there. And some of the older folks had passed. And so it was kind of a different situation. And so now I've got my bride who is subscribing to the Record Searchlight from the end of March till we move, trying to find us a place to live when we get here, right? And she's making these.
Yeah, because there's no Zillow, right? There's no Zillow in 97.
No Zillow. So she's dialing, and it's so funny because it's like every phone call she makes, we're trying to find a house to rent so that we can live there and figure out where we eventually want to buy, right? And every phone call, she either knows the person or knows someone the person knows. And I'm thinking
that's
myself,
that's what 5 generations does.
Yeah.
Well, it's also that, that's what happens when you live in a county that at that time had 100,000 versus just under 2 million.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Hey, can you name something that you've learned in life the hard way? I mean, there's some grind, and I love the grind, and it sounds like there's some amazing things some decisions that you made that turned into gold, and you were able to turn some things around and make some choices with Kelly. Looking back now, is there anything is like, oh, yeah, that lesson hurt?
Yeah, I don't know if I would use the word hurt, but I would use I would put it in perspective that my life could have been easier if I got an education right out of high school, right? But I had, I did find it. I was like in the top 20% of my class and all that. And that was really with not putting a lot of work in, because I was social, I was athletic. I wanted the whole balance of things, right?
Yeah, balance is important.
Right, it is important. But I could have easily gone to college, and we had great state schools in New York, but that wasn't really even on my possibility screen either at that point. It's like I kept thinking, well, I probably didn't really know about aid and things like that. I'm thinking, my parents, we can't afford to go to a restaurant. I'm not going to put them in a situation where they have to, find a way to help me go through school. So, when I ended up going to a community college. I got about probably 30 credits going at night after work when I was working at the IRS. So that, that was tough. I'd start work at 7:30 in the morning, and sometimes I get back from community college 11 at night. And so it was a tough way to go. And then I went from having a 4.0 to a 3 point something, because in the semester that they asked me to move to San Francisco, it was right in the middle of the semester. I couldn't withdraw, so I got F's in all those classes.
Just took it on the chin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got a better opportunity. I'm out of here. I'm curious, Tony. Given the life that you've lived and the things that you've seen, what gives you hope these days?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that gives me hope. A lot of things that give me hope. Obviously, knowing that God's in control is the big one, right? Knowing that, I don't have to fear. I'm going to be taken care of, and my family is going to be taken care of. And the proof is we've always had an abundant life. And the reality is I'm not sure what we've done to deserve that, but it's there. But the other thing that I really see, in spite of all the sound bites and the political disbursement and, the way we communicate with one another, in the Venture Hub and in the new businesses with younger people, I see people collaborating and trying to contribute to other people's success, and not so focused on what's their own, but what they can share with others to drive mutual success. And I'm not sure everyone else gets that same vantage point that I've been lucky enough to have with, what I've done over the last few years here in the community. But that is very, very uplifting. And that only 20% of the population supported the Revolutionary War. And yet we went through it and did it. It doesn't take everybody, right? Mm-hmm. It takes a few people, a few drivers, a few passionate, committed people that can pull everybody forward. And I think that exists.
Yeah. Well, that's actually ironic, because, we started earlier in our conversation talking about community and the community you grew up in. And I find it funny that now here you are in this season of your life, building community, right? And building community through that collaboration and that collaborative spirit. Can we go back to your parents? How do you honor your parents today?
Boy, I think probably the two most important ways are keeping close with my siblings. That was always very, very important, especially even my mom, as she was getting near the end of her life, she kept saying, this isn't going to pull you guys away from each other, because I'm in California, they're in New York, right? And I would go back every quarter to visit when my mom was alive. I just always did that, right? But we are very, very close, and I don't go back there near as much. But now what we do is we find destinations and meet together. So it's kind of changed the way we do it, but we still get together, and we are on the phone. I'm on the phone with one of my brothers every day, sometimes twice a day. And then and the other one about once every week, and then my sister about once every couple of weeks. So yeah, I think that was really important to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that modeling that with my kids is a way to honor my parents. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, we now have my daughter who went to school at Cal State Long Beach and lived in LA for a while. She's now up here at the Simpson nursing program. So now we're all here again, right? So my wife has really been trying to get the kids to commit to Sunday dinner at our house, right? To try and, I won't put them to work like my grandpa did.
Yeah.
Maybe I will.
Start mixing that cement, kids. Let's
go. Tony, is there anyone else that you would like to honor? I mean, you've done a fantastic job walking us through some of your experiences and the people that, what was it, threw some gravel in your mud?
Yeah.
You know, but is there anyone in particular you feel prompted to honor right now?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my Aunt Joan, who I visited in August, who's in hospice right now. She's in her upper 80s. So when I said that there was a relative that called me and said, I have a job that I think would be good for you in that computer terminal company.
Aunt
Joan. That was her.
Aunt Joan.
And you know, all through my career, she's always been very supportive, and she's been one of my biggest cheerleaders.
Wow.
Joan Baldessano.
I love that. Thank you, Aunt Joan, for being there, right? You've had a couple of moments where, you know, Joe comes up to you and says, hey, I think you need to go through this program. And Joan comes up to you and says, hey, I got a position over in my place. None of those are accidents.
You know, Mike, I love I love that question of honoring, and you know, you've talked about relationships. You talk about you know, these people that have been in your life. And one thing that stands out to me, Tony, Mike asked the question about a moment where you could envision that you felt rich. You talked about your experience in that company, and you got emotional for a second. And I can't help but think about, and it's evident in our conversation that you're a builder of relationships. And, you know, to hear you talk about that job and people that impacted you, but the list of people that you impacted as well is amazing. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to kind of sit here and listen to your experiences and the reminders it is to me of the importance of investing in the people around us. Just period, right? The people that we love, but the people that are around us. And I'm grateful for you for that, for sure.
Yeah. I'd like to share another story that I think was an important learning thing as it relates to building relationships. That was a business one. So when I was working for this computer terminal company, we pursued IBM's business for years, and we kept losing it to bigger competitors, right? And I kept telling them, you know, we're a better suit for you culturally because of our focus and our processes are much more aligned with yours. The other guys are bigger, but they do it differently. And I kept telling them that, you know, eventually we're going to do this, right? And we kept losing it. And then those relationships would fall apart pretty quickly. And eventually they came back to us, and we had this big development, phase. And now we're going to have a worldwide release. We're building 2,000 units for IBM, and IBM views their computer terminals as the window to their system. This is the holy grail, right? And, you know, one of the reasons why we wanted that business, I wanted it, was not only was it a lot of units and revenue, but we were already doing great things in the way we made our products and our quality and all that, but they were even a step above us And I figured if we did their business and met their needs, that would then be shared with all of our other clients, right? We'd be so far ahead of our competitors, right? So now we go through this whole phase. We build the first 2,000 units. We're going to do our worldwide release. And, everything is so meticulous. Even the way we have to load the pallets in the truck, the boxes have to line up within like a quarter of an inch. Otherwise, they're no good. So all of a sudden, the trucks are loaded. And I had always told the IBM executives, I will always treat your business as mine. I will always be honest with you, right? All of a sudden, because we were rushing to meet the deadline, we got the first set of boards in. We put them in the units. We tested them. They worked perfectly, right? Life is beautiful. Then one of my engineers comes to me and he says, we normally do a bill of materials. We look at all the components on the board to make sure that it's right. And he goes, there's actually an extra component on the board. And I said, well, all these units went through final test. And he goes, yeah, I know. It's basically an old circuit. We don't use it. It doesn't do anything. It won't affect reliability.
It's the appendix.
Exactly. It's the appendix, right? He says, no one will ever know. And I just said, I know, right? So I picked up the phone and I knew that IBM could basically tell me to unload, open up every one of those units and fix those boards, retest them, put them back in. And the fact that I called them and told them what had happened, and that we would, my commitment was that I would never withhold anything from them. And when we explained the technology related aspects of it, they had a little meeting internally and they came back and they said, no, we trust you. We're going to let you ship them. And the fact that we had that interchange of honesty, that relationship lasted for 11 years until the technology kind of died. And it changed to, rather than negotiating with each other, it was always, well, what's your pain point on this? What's your pain point? And working together as real partners. So just that real incident of honesty, right, in a big way, it's just amazing what it did to that relationship. And I think that's true in relationships of all types.
Mm-hmm.
No one will know, but I know.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Never the wrong time to do the right thing.
That's right.
Well, Tony, our time is drawing to a close. I want to give you one. I just want to make sure that I don't want you walking away with music unsung. So is there anything on your heart that you felt like you wanted to share in your time together before we wrap it up?
Yeah. I need to do more within my own family. So I think my kids are believers, but I think in their 20s, they've pulled away. And, I think both Kelly and I want to help them build a deeper relationship and really, get closer to God every day. And then the same thing with my brothers and sisters in New York. And I, over the last 5 or 6 years, I try and bring it up in our daily conversations as it relates, right, to the things that we're doing. I'm not being preachy, but I'm being applicable, maybe is the right word, right, where it's appropriate. And, we're all getting older. I probably got to move faster, right? So I guess I got to pray about that. And my wife is really a good support as it relates to that. And so that's kind of my testimony right now. Now it's recorded, right?
Well, so I feel like I want you to come back, Tony, and let's spend 2 hours talking about those two things, because there's a lot there that I'd love to talk to you about. That's just that's important. I appreciate you sharing those thoughts with me.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure, guys. Tyler, I really got to tell you, I've enjoyed getting to know you a little more, even though it's kind of remote.
That's right.
But I feel like I've learned a lot about you just listening to, the podcasts. And it's really admirable what you guys are doing. And I know sometimes you ask, about, what did you think when you were asked, to be on the podcast? And yeah, it is a natural thing to say that, I'm honored, and I am, but I'm also humbled because for a couple of things. I know some of the other people that you've invited, so that humbles me. And the fact that you guys think you might be able to learn something from my life is even a bigger humbler. So I appreciate it. And I told you, Mike, that just going through the questions and looking back on my life and having to frame these things in a way where maybe they'll even have more impact on me moving forward than they did originally. It's just kind of an interesting process for your guests.
Yeah. Well, Tony, let me say this in all humility. The people that we've had on the show that you know and admire and are humbled to be in their company, they are the people we know and love because they know people like you.
Amen.
Oh, thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
Like, it's fingerprints, it's impressions, it's input, it's feedback, right? It's moments where I know there are people that are talking about you the way you just talked about Joe,
Absolutely.
the way you just talked about Aunt Joan, right? And that's what you do until you're done. That's what we all need to do until we're done, right? And that's what this life is about. And we're all just George Bailey on the bridge saying, I want to live again, right? I want to live again. And Tony, that's what brings us to our last question, right? It is about living that rich life. Mm-hmm. And it's about the lessons that you've shared with us over the last couple. And I'm with Tyler. I think we need a couple more, right? So free up your calendar. But Tony, what does it mean to you to be considered the richest man in town?
Yeah, it's going to basically tie together some of the things I've already said, but, I think life is multifaceted, right? And it's a full life when you recognize and realize that, there's just so many aspects of it. And, so I've had a great upbringing. I've had a wonderful career. I've got a great family now, and that family is growing with grandchildren. I've been blessed to be able to take the things that I've learned and share them with people. And I'm still learning things, so I have more to share. So from my perspective, being rich is eternal. And I hope that, that I'm deserving of God's blessing to me of eternal life.
Beat that, Tyler Gould. Being rich is eternal.
I wrote that down, and I aspire to that thought. I love that. And Tony, I am grateful for the lessons that you shared today. I'm taken aback a little bit by the conversations about relationship and the depth that you shared about the importance of relationships. And, what I love about this podcast, Tony, is at the end of it, I've got pages of notes and I've got thoughts swirling in my head that I want to apply into my own life. So I'm grateful to you for that. I'm grateful to Mike for introducing me to you, albeit remotely, but maybe one of these days that'll change. But I'm grateful for that, Tony. So thanks for being here with us.
Well, my pleasure. Maybe someday you, me, and your dad can go have lunch together.
Let's do that. Let's make a plan. Let's do that.
Tony, you came with gifts, and we appreciate it. We feel like what you just gave us is a gift. I got one last question for you. New York kid, California man, Yankees or Dodgers?
Yankees all the way. But I'm actually a 49ers fan though.
Are you really? Okay. All right.
Yeah. When I bought the tickets, when I lived in the Bay Area, when I first moved out there, I bought season tickets.
Oh, no way.
I had them for 32 years.
What year was it that you bought the season tickets, Tony?
1979.
Oh, you
when
saw
they were
some
really
great
bad
football. You
Yeah,
saw
but-
some
Well,
great football.
Yeah, you were in the
Right,
glory
not the
years
first
there.
year.
Yeah.
Again,
That's why
probably a great return on investment. That might have been the best investment you ever made.
it was fabulous. And then, and they were so bad then. A buddy of mine and I bought 32 seats. And every year we would sell them to our friends.
No way.
So we always were surrounded with the people we wanted to go to the game with. And even when I moved to New York, about 3 games a year, I take the flight out of JFK at 8:00 on Sunday morning, land at 11 and take a cab to the Stick.
No way.
Go to the game and then go out, tailgate after or go out to dinner, and they drop me back off at the 10 p.m. red eye.
Oh, no.
You know what? That
That's
might be an
amazing.
appropriate answer to what it means to be the richest man in town, because at a football game surrounded by friends with season ticket holders, that's pretty close to heaven.
I was just going to say, how awesome is that you're watching a game with 32 of your closest friends?
That is awesome. That is awesome.
I love
Well,
it.
Tony, you're an amazing person. Thank you so much. And we will definitely keep in touch. All right, brother?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Take
Tony.
care.
Have a good night.
Bye. See you, Tom.
Good idea, Ernie. A toast to my big brother George, the richest man in town.